The Israeli parliament, the Knesset, in debate, November 1980. The government was being asked to formally annex the occupied Golan Heights. Prime Minister Begin agreed in principle this territory, part of Syria until the 1967 war, would never be returned. But he was under pressure from Golan Cohen of the ultra-right-wing Rebirth Party to turn that principle into law. Mrs. Cohen had only a few months before introduced a similar bill proclaiming the whole of Jerusalem to be Israeli. The passing of that bill led to international indignation. And it was the depth of world reaction that led the Begin cabinet to withdraw support from the Golan Annexation bill. They voted against, as they decided the move was ill-timed and would further isolate Israel. The bill was defeated. The vote focused on this rugged region. The Golan Heights, averaging over 1,000 meters above sea level, form a strategic plateau between Syria and Israel. In the wars between Israel and her Arab neighbors, this has been one of the most bitterly contested sectors. Since the October 1973 war, Israel has shown a willingness to bargain territory for peace. Most of the Sinai Peninsula has been returned to Egypt. On the West Bank, the more vexed question of autonomy is still being negotiated. But in the Golan, the Israeli government doesn't appear ready to compromise. According to Mr. Begin last November, Israel will not return this strategic area to Syria, even in return for a peace treaty. The issue here is security. The heights are seen as vital to Israel's future defense. These former Syrian bunkers commanded the Golan. After the creation of the Israeli state in 1948, the Syrians transformed this area into a stronghold. From here, they were able to shell Israeli positions in the valleys below. The legacy of damage and Israeli lives lost from 1948 to 1967 has created a powerful lobby opposed to returning the heights to Syria. This film was taken before the 1967 war and shows the damage inflicted on an Israeli kibbutz after a Syrian bombardment. In one of the most daring assaults of the Six-Day War, the Israelis pushed the Syrians off the Golan Heights. The Israelis captured what was thought to be an impregnable position. The engagement was short and sharp, with Israeli control wrested after 2 days of fighting. In the course of the October 1973 war, the Israelis occupied an additional 197 square miles of territory. The Israeli flag fluttered over the former Syrian Golan town of Quneitra. After resisting initial Syrian attacks, the Israeli armored columns advanced down off the heights. The Israeli drive, with armor supported by air power, was to bring them within 39 kilometers of Damascus. It was a more bitter and evenly contested duel than the 1967 war. By the time of the ceasefire, an estimated 7,500 Syrians and 5,000 Israelis had lost their lives in the battle for the Golan. post-1973 period has seen the Israelis increasing their presence on the heights. Roads and communications have been built, linking and integrating the area with the rest of Israel. In 1966, more than 150,000 people lived in the Golan area. Most of them fled as the Israeli army advanced. Odd reminders of the Syrian presence remain. This Syrian army truck was mounted pointing skywards by the Israelis. Elsewhere, villages and army camps lie as ruined reminders that this was once part of Syria. In the present climate between the two countries, there is little possibility of the Syrian farmers returning to their former homes. Under the ceasefire agreement, the Israelis withdrew from most of the territory captured in the 1973 conflict. But they retain commanding positions on the heights and look out over the plains towards Damascus. This officer is on Hill 109, one of the key Israeli defense points. Israeli troops successfully withstood Syrian assaults here in the Yom Kippur War. Hill 109 overlooks the now deserted town of Quneitra. This used to be the main town of the Golan area. 25,000 people lived there. Continued clashes on this border ended in 1974 with the establishment of a UN buffer zone. Today, sophisticated intelligence gathering equipment checks that both the Syrians and Israelis stand by the disengagement agreement. The presence of the UN force is more than symbolic. As well as being an observation force, they are charged with supervising and protecting the ceasefire. These Finnish soldiers are part of a contingent of 1,250 men. They are loading up for an exercise designed to show how they will intercede in the event of an outbreak of fighting. This reaction force will be sent out to provide a buffer between the two opposing sides in any flare-up. With little short-term prospect of a settlement on this front, continued UN presence is seen as vital. Behind the military lines, Israeli occupation has largely replaced that of the Syrians. But there is also a distinct community who claim to have benefited from Israeli occupation. These hill people are the Druze, a race who take their name from their unique religion. It's a closed faith founded in Egypt over 900 years ago and remains only in this area. The Druze permit no conversion, either away from or to their religion, and no intermarriage. They do, however, practice taqiyya, or concealment. This allows them to adapt to the laws and customs of any nation they find themselves within. By this means, the Druze have survived and maintained their identity. Israeli settlement on the Golan began hard on the heels of their capture of the heights in 1967. 1 month after the war, a group of private Israeli citizens established the first kibbutz. It was soon recognized by the then Labour government. Already, unofficially, the Israeli cabinet excluded the possibility of restoring the Golan Heights to Syria. The new settlements set about developing agriculture as the foundation of a prosperous economic base. The initial pioneering camps were soon developed into permanent communities. In some areas, military outposts became civilian kibbutzim. Despite the often harsh terrain, there are abundant water resources in the Golan. It's the source of the Jordan River, which supplies more than 30% of Israel's water. This resource has enabled the Israelis to transform many acres of barren land into lush cotton and wheat fields. Golan's water is another powerful reason why the Israelis wish to retain the heights. Water has allowed for a rich and varied agriculture, increasing migration to the area. There are now 27 settlements and 6,000 Israelis in the Golan. The occupied zone is 45 miles long and 15 miles wide. In the northeastern corner is the settlement of Neve Ativ. It lies close to the border with Lebanon and Syria, in the rugged foothills near Mount Hermon. It began as an outpost in October 1971. Today, it is an established agricultural community. The perimeter fence guards against attack from across the Syrian border. This kibbutz is strongly fortified with watchtowers, bunkers and shelters. Today, Israel still feels that Syria is its most implacable enemy. Israelis have been attracted up here by a mixture of nationalism and self-interest. Many believe that this land is rightfully theirs, a part of biblical Eretz Israel. But there is also the fact that the climate is mild and the way of life offers an escape from the cities. Ilana Graf has been at Neve Ativ for 5 years. How would she feel if she had to leave?
I wouldn't like it because I think this is my real home. I never felt like this when I lived in the town, and I'm already 5 years here, and it would be very disappointing.
But isn't it sometimes worrying living so close to such an implacable enemy, such as Syria?
We don't feel it here. We never had anything to fear from. I mean, no bombing, and no. We didn't have to go to a shelter, and I think it's more safer than in the town right now in Israel.
Does the latest defeat of the Golan bill to annex this area make you feel less secure?
Yes, it has a certain amount of. We have a certain amount of fear because we wouldn't like to be. I don't know how to say it. We wouldn't like to be thrown away from here like they do in the south. But I'm quite sure that this bill will go over maybe another year or another 6 months because everyone wants it. And I don't think any man or woman in Israel would like to see the Golan going away from us.
Settlements like Neve Ativ are today largely self-sufficient. Here, beekeeping is an important activity, but there is also general agriculture and a lucrative income from tourism. To the south of the Golan area is the Sea of Galilee and Mevo Hama Kibbutz. The biblical Sea of Galilee, or Lake Tiberias, used to form a natural border with Syria. Israeli fishermen on the lake prior to 1967 were sometimes subject to Syrian fire from the northeastern bank. Mevo Hama lies close to the shore on formerly Syrian territory. It was set up in June 1968. Not solely an agricultural community, it manufactures laboratory equipment. It's an impressive example of Israeli enterprise, a completely self-contained manufacturing and agricultural unit producing high-value products. Like other kibbutzim, Mevo Hama has drawn Jewish settlers from all over the world.
Robert Field
came here 7 years ago from New Zealand. What was his reaction
What's your reaction
to the bill before the Israeli Parliament to formally annex the Golan Heights?
I think that the possibility of the law being passed at this stage of time is very inadvisable for all concerned, not only for the people who live here but for Israel in general. I think it's a move that will only cause more international alienation of the state of Israel, and I'm not even entirely sure myself if the law should actually ever come about. I do believe that the wisest move at this stage would be to leave options open. Today it seems quite obvious that to make peace with the present Syrian government is not on, but nobody knows what's going to be within the next few years. People 2 or 3 years ago would not have thought that peace with Egypt was possible, and events have proven otherwise. There's no reason, all things being equal, that the same couldn't happen on this border. If there are to be changes of any sort, then there could be possibly cosmetic changes, but at this stage we should stay where we are, but we don't at all need the law, as far as I'm concerned, to keep us here. It's not the law that's going to keep us here, it's the facts of life that are going to keep us here.
How would you feel if you were forced to leave?
I think the feeling would be very bitter, that's for sure. You can ask anybody that here, anybody who's lived here and invested as much of their life and as much of their sweat as they have, is not in a hurry to leave his home. Nobody is anywhere.
For the settlers here, home is a sophisticated permanent settlement. These shrimp breeding tanks show the scale of the investment. It seems to point to Israel's determination not to hand back the Golan. Last July, the Israeli cabinet decided to increase the number of Israeli settlers here to 10,000 by mid-1982. For some Israelis, this action is not enough. They believe that this area should immediately become part of Israel. This lobby's most powerful spokesperson is the Golan Bill's sponsor, Golan. But why does she feel the Golan should be annexed?
First of all, it's a part of Israel. It's a part of the historical Israel. And I want my country. Secondly, there is a consensus in Israel, in the Knesset, and outside the parliament, why the settlers there should be outsiders. And you can't settle in a place that you are not sure that it is a legitimate part of your country. You can't make deep roots there. And thirdly, because all the world will think that we are not definite and we are not really wants to see it as our country, and maybe we are ready to negotiate about it.
But don't you think that it would be a bad public relations move for Israel now with the somewhat precarious Israeli position vis-a-vis the world and the United Nations?
We are not isolated. We can't be more isolated as we are already are. We can't be more. Maybe it's not nice. Maybe it's not good for public relations, but it's good for my existence.
For the moment, world opinion has influenced the Israeli government against annexation. But the question has merely been delayed. Backed by Israeli public opinion, the Golan lobby will try again. So, from these northern hills to the southern area surrounding the Sea of Galilee, it appears that the Golan is one occupied region the Israelis are not willing to trade for peace.